Money doesn't just come from one place. It drips, trickles, flows, and floods into our lives in different ways. Welcome to Drip, Trickle, Flow, Flood, a podcast that explores the power of multiple income streams. We've got merch. That's right. Drip, Trickle, Flow, Flood t-shirts are officially here, and they're as comfy as they are conversation starting. Grab yours at the link in our show notes. How you doing today, Tony?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. What's going on over there? 20 minutes
Well,
away.
yeah, as I mentioned before, I'm stoked. I live in a very rural setting and my internet I've been on DSL, super slow. And I think they must have got some government funding or something, the company. And so they just ran fiber down our road. And I went from the maximum speed of 18 megabytes a second to, I don't know, I'm like over a gigabyte of speed right now. So it's game changer from just being able to download and upload and going to help with photography stuff. And probably this podcast, I would assume because there was times where we'd be recording and I'd want to say something and it'd be like, your signal is weak. And I'm like, all right, I'll just sit here quietly.
I think this is a good reminder to everyone because if anyone's been listening for a while, you would remember that Tony didn't have a mic for probably 30 episodes of our podcast. So not only did he not have a mic, but he also didn't have pretty stable internet. If you're ever thinking, should I start this? Just do it because you don't have to have all of the perfect technology or setup. Just do it.
Yeah.
Good reminder.
I totally agree. I spoke at a Rotary Club this morning and was talking about writing and getting the podcasts going and those sorts of things. And yeah, that was a big part of my message is just if you have something you want to say or write or whatever, just put it out there into the world and maybe you'll get an audience, maybe not, but just put it out there and see what happens. You don't really have that much to lose. So you watch a few less Netflix shows, you'll be fine.
Very true. Good point. Watch a little bit less Netflix, a little bit more creation. All right. On that note, I think we have a good article today to discuss, which is from Entrepreneur Magazine. It is all about millennials kind of ditching the startup grind, and instead they are buying existing businesses, which is a model that's often called entrepreneurship through acquisition or ETA.
Yeah, this is a cool, and other than just a cool idea, I've done both. I've purchased existing businesses and I've started from scratch. And the idea of doing it this way, it does take a lot of the risk out of it. Maybe you're paying more, maybe not to get into it, but you're buying an established business with customers and all these things. And where this is coming from is there's a lot of people, right? Baby boomers are retiring and they want their business to continue. They have a lot of pride in it.
Yes. So this is a good time, a prime time for folks to start thinking about this. I also find it's interesting because there is a trend lately as well of people just not wanting to go into that burnout culture, which makes total sense. And that is often synonymous with the startup world. And it's very true, right? Because you're in that VC hustle and there's high burn rates there. So I think that's very interesting that now there is this trend of acquiring a business versus doing that whole startup grind yourself. I have never bought a business. I've only done the grind, but my husband and I have looked into different things and did the math just to see, and we're always looking. So what are some benefits that you see, Tony, especially as somebody who has done this before?
Yeah, sorry, I just banged my desk here. So if an established sector, then maybe you can say, okay, great. If we start this business, you can see that this is going on with other businesses. If we do it as good or better than them, then should be successful. So that's one thing if you're going to do a startup. If you're doing a startup that you don't know if it's going to be successful, it's a new market, or there's maybe there's not many people doing that. And is the market going to be saturated if you add? You're taking a lot of that risk out by buying an established business that has been proven that people want this service, widget, whatever it is, it exists. So that is a big part of what I see. And then they're also, I don't know, I think business plans are a waste of time. They're not totally. I think the act of doing a business plan has value because you're thinking and doing all these things. But the reality is, as soon as that business plan is done being written, it's outdated. And
Mhm.
you don't know what you don't know. And so you're you're getting to benefit from a lot of the mistakes that the person that started that business went through. And so I think that those are it's almost like a cheat code, right? Was that
Yeah.
thing for Nintendo, the Game Genie? You could plug it in and then you could cheat the whole time through the game. I feel like it's a little bit of that.
That's a good point. And there are lots of different businesses for sale, of course. This article doesn't directly say it, but I've read it in other pieces before where a good thing to look at is what would be called, let's say, quote unquote, boring businesses. I don't necessarily think they're boring, but some people might. So, example would be a laundromat. Those like mail, I'm a bit obsessed about owning one of these one day. Those like mailbox service places. They're very popular here because people we live in a border town. So people often will rent mailboxes here, but there's just that little tiny place with the certain number of mailboxes, and then they'll usually have like printing or something in there. That could be a good one. Plumbing companies, anything that may not be considered particularly splashy or something you might see in like startup culture, but those businesses can be like wildly profitable.
Yeah. And a lot of the ones you just mentioned there too are also really hard for technology to replace. I think technology can assist in those businesses very well, but not fully replace. So not only let's my parents are baby boomers, so let's just go with the assumption that maybe not every baby boomer is technologically up to date as maybe a generation below them. So potentially you get into that business that they've been running successfully. You buy this business from a baby boomer, they've been doing well. But if you go in there and can use some AI or whatever, even just create better systems, add some technology in there, you might be able to increase profit margins right off the bat by becoming more efficient with the way the business operates. So not only could you get one of those in quote boring businesses, but you might be able to go in with one of those types of businesses and up the profitability right off the bat, just with a different knowledge base and a different perspective. The flip side is you don't want to go in and if they got a good thing going, you don't want to go in there and screw it up either.
Yeah. That's true, but I like the angle that you're saying. It's not completely upending everything that's there because you're inheriting a customer base usually, and so you don't wanna make everything shift that much, but I think some folks are attracted to startups because of the quote unquote "innovation" of them or the creativity of them, and so I think that's a good point that, like, if you feel as if, "Oh, I don't wanna acquire a business because to me that's going to limit or prohibit my creativity or innovation in some way." I think that's not true because you can go in and maybe modernize the systems or add your creative flair to whatever is already happening there without destroying the underbelly of what makes that business work. So that's a really good point. And then talking risk and reward, because I think that's a common question that comes up is buying an existing business actually less risky? Or is it just a different kind of risk compared to a startup?
I think it's a different kind of risk. I think the benefit of buying an existing business is there's math behind the risk
Mhm.
and you have control, a lot of control over how much risk you're willing to take on, right? They have their profit and loss statement. You can look and say, okay, here's what the numbers are saying. You can say I'm buying it, but only for this price. The math doesn't work beyond that.
Mm.
So you can mitigate your risk a little bit with how much you want to buy that business from, and you have the option to say no. With a startup, you can go in and say, I'm only going to spend this much and I'm going to make this and that. But again, you don't know what you don't know. Probably going to cost you more than you thought it would. And you're probably not going to make as much as you thought you were going to. And it's a grind. Startups are
Mm.
hard. It's not just all happy hours and being in articles. It's a lot of just grinding and not having things work and doing the unglamorous stuff, which is licenses and permits and just paperwork and trying to get a following on social media or get somebody in the community to know you. And I think 15 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, if you wanted to hop on Instagram and get some followers and get seen, that was a pretty realistic option. It's
Mhm.
so saturated now that it's tough and likely going to cost you some bucks if you want to get some eyes on your business. So, getting something that's established and has that customer base and just has the track record of this is what the revenue is. And you can also see their expenses, right? It's not just the income that it's producing, but what are their expenses? And are there big surprises that could jump out and really be detrimental to the business? And if you can look back at a few years of financials, you might be able to get an answer for that.
That's a good point, especially the math. Having some math to lay back on can be very helpful. And then speaking of math, there's a financial reality to this too, right? So this article is about millennials. We also know that millennials carry a lot of student debt. They're facing high living costs. We're all facing that. Many haven't even been able to acquire real estate yet. So, what do you think about that? Does this make purchasing a business more appealing or not? And like, how accessible would this path be for people if you don't have strong capital? And you bought a business quite young, right? So, walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. On our last episode with Lindsay, we talked about buying the hair salon. And fortunately, my brother's a little saver and maybe we'll have to have him on the podcast
Yeah.
at some point and gave me a loan for a case of beer. I was lucky to have a brother but it was a very inexpensive business and really was a situation where the the owner of the business, she wanted to go spend more time with family. She was
Mhm.
tired of having the business. She just wanted to go rent a chair somewhere and simplify her life. And she was happy to sell. We bought it for essentially what the value of the equipment was. So that was a very good deal. But I think there are good deals out there. And what I was saying at the start is not all these baby boomers that have these businesses and want to retire have kids or have kids that want to take over their businesses and they want to see their business go on. They take a lot of pride in that. And so there could be deals to be had where some of them may be financially set and it's really more of an emotional thing than anything else. And so they might be willing to give a very good deal on on selling their business, or they might be up for carrying a contract. And so if they're gonna finance the sale of the business, you can get as creative as you want with that. Maybe it's a straight number, but maybe it's a percentage of profits, and maybe they can stay on as a consultant for part of it or whatever. There's a million ways to structure. I think you can get more creative with purchasing a business than you can even with purchasing a house. There's just a really wide range of ways you could go about making it happen. And yeah, there's comps and there's formulas based off of revenue and those sorts of things, but it's not like real estate. And a lot of that was probably bought for X and you want to sell it for Y because that's what you have into it. Plus, that's what everything else is going up in value. Where a business, yeah, you've got your equipment in there and you've got that stuff, but that stuff's probably depreciated on some level. But it's a lot of sweat equity. And maybe what they want more out of that sweat equity than money is to see it carry on. So I think finding those things, and I forget where, I don't know if it was this article or a different article, but literally just don't be above going into a business that you like that has an older owner. Just be like, I just want to let you know that I really admire your business. And if you were ever going to sell this thing, I'd love to know. And no one's going to get mad at that. They're just going to be flattered and they say, oh, sorry, my kid's going to get it. Or I've got a manager here that's going to take it over or whatever. Or they'll say, here's the keys. I'm moving to somewhere sunny.
Take it.
Yeah, take it. Uh,
And
I,
that's a good I was going to ask you that. What are the pathways to finding these opportunities? And that is a great one is like just become familiar with your community or maybe places you vacation and maybe could see yourself living there one day. and just walk in and ask the owner, are there any other places like online? I know I've seen like Biz Buy Sell, but any other places you know about that might have businesses for sale?
Yeah, I think LoopNet has
Mhm.
businesses on there. I've even seen it on like Marketplace and
Oh,
Craigslist.
Craigslist.
But there are also commercial real estate agents that they specialize in business transactions. When we bought Salon Bellissima,
Mhm.
did that work? I don't remember how we found out it was for sale, but we bought it through a commercial real estate agent, and then he helped us lease a space for our second location that was a startup, totally different brands. We opened up a second one, and then he didn't think we'd want to have two salons, and we did. We designed them to be very different so they wouldn't compete with each other. They were very close in proximity to each other. And he started bringing us offers for our first salon. And finally, we said, okay, I guess if they'll pay that, we'll sell it to them. Those commercial agents, they're trying to make a buck. So if you can find somebody in your area, they're going to be hustling. They get paid when a transaction happens. I think that's another way. But I think what you said was being out in the community. I was at a basketball tournament over the weekend, and I was talking to one of the other dads, and he mentioned that he had been approached by two different businesses recently that they want him to buy their business, that they're ready to retire or move on to
Mm.
something else. And he's from here and in the community, and they know him and know he's a hard worker, and thought that he could be somebody good to take it over. And so that's just the very beginning of the process, right? Now you got to do all the work and see if the math makes sense and if you
Mhm.
actually want the business and there's equipment or all those things. So I think there's a handful of different ways. And also it's just like the put it out into the world mentality, right?
We're looking to buy. Tell everybody
Yeah.
we're looking to buy a business.
Yeah. And I think that often is where these things come from best. And I think that's likely how you're going to get maybe the best deal. If you're just going through a realtor, not just, but if you're going through a realtor, it's not personal. There's definitely that transactional component to it where probably the dollars are going to speak, as opposed to if somebody hears that you're interested and they know who you are in the community and what you're going to do with the business or what they presume you're going to do with the business. I think that probably would lead you towards getting a better value on the purchase.
Yeah, I like that. And there's also, I think, the trend piece of this where, like, what is this shift telling us about the next generation? So right now we're talking about millennial. I'm not millennial. What am I? Gen X. I'm Gen X. I'm like, what am I? Gen X. Think we like just missed millennial by a year. And you're millennial, right?
I
Yeah.
mean, it depends. I'm literally like straddling the fence with
Yeah,
that.
I think okay,
Sorry,
so we
but yeah,
both are.
yeah.
We're straddling the line.
Yeah,
We're in that little like sandwich. I think they call us the sandwich generation or something.
yeah, we're
We're
the
in
we're
that
the Xenials.
Xenials. That's what we are,
Yeah,
Xenials.
we're the Xenials.
So
Yeah.
we're Xenials. We're not millennials. And that, but then also we have Gen Z coming up and then who are already in the workforce and then generations after that. But I think it's interesting to see what this trend is telling us where I know when I was growing up, and you grew up in an entrepreneurial family, so perhaps it's a little different. When I grew up, it was very much like there wasn't any consideration of buying a business. It's like you go work for a company and you work there a really long time. You do your 401k and then you retire in 30 years. And that was very much the belief. So I think it's quite cool now that I think this data is showing us that millennial and then perhaps Gen Z as well are looking more toward like different values like independence and work life balance. And then I think the big one is like the purposeful work too. Like you want your work to mean something. And I think this is a cool way that folks can think about because often when we think about, I want my work to mean something, you think about, I'm going to start my own thing or do my own thing. But here, I think we're tapping into something where there are these wonderful people who have owned businesses and they don't have anybody to leave them to. And it's meaningful to them often to leave them to somebody who cares versus I'm just selling to anyone. And so It's this real values driven exchange, if you will, to buy that kind of business that would feel passionate for you, but it also gives back to the owner who spent their life building that, who is like just so excited somebody wants to take over something that they loved so much.
When you talk about the business having meaning and we talk about having a boring business, let's use plumbing for an example. Maybe that feels boring compared to starting some AI tech firm or something like that. But I will tell you that customer that has a plumbing issue, there's probably nothing more important in their life than that plumbing issue right
Oh
there.
yeah.
And so, sometimes the boring job is actually the reality is I don't need to make funny pictures on artificial intelligence. That's
True.
not going to change my life at all. But if I've got a water leak, that sucker's got to be solved immediately. Actually, when we got back from Maui, we got home at about 2 in the morning. And I had actually gone first, and then Lindsay and Harper caught up. And I hadn't thought about the fact that the temperatures were going to be really cold. And so we came home to frozen pipes.
Oops.
And fortunately, I know where it freezes because I've neglected to turn the heaters on in the past. And so it was going, I solved the problem quickly in the morning. But yeah, that's a real important thing, right? You want your water to work, you want your lights to
Yeah.
on all those things. And so I think in addition to giving purpose to that person selling it, purpose to the person buying it, thinking about those customers. And I do think there's also a level of people wanting to support the mom and pop businesses. And so I think that if you want to be ingrained in your community, having a business that's been established and been there that people are relying on and visiting, that's a great way to is that the right word,
Hmm.
Melissa? Ingratiate yourself in the community and be a part of it. So I don't know. I think it's cool. I think it's a really neat trend. It also is
Yeah.
probably, if you just think about it like from an efficiency standpoint, just like when you think about just like energy and waste and time and all these things, like to go in and have people take over an existing business as opposed to just constantly reinventing the wheel, throwing all the marketing stuff in the garbage and just all the things that go into starting a business. It's actually pretty cool and it could be just seamless.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good point. It feels a little bit more relaxed in a way. I'm sure it's hard work. It's of course it's hard work, but like you said, seamless is a good word for that versus this constant stress of the startup cycle. This is an interesting article. If anyone has any thoughts, any of our lovely listeners, we'd always love to hear them. Love your thoughts, feedback. Have you bought a business? What was your experience? Maybe we'd also love to have you on the podcast if you want to come on and talk about it. And if you like this episode of Drip Trickle Flow Flood, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.